Hi there. My name is James Valenti. I'm a resident of Brattleboro, and I'm here today to interview Beth Pearce, a Democrat running for the position of state treasurer for the state of Vermont. The election is November 6th, so make sure you get out and vote. And hopefully today you can learn a little bit about who Beth Pearce is, what the state treasurer does, and I'm sure Beth would try to tell you why you should vote for her. So, thank you for coming down
Thank
to
you very
Brattleboro,
much.
Beth.
My pleasure, James. Thanks for having us.
State treasurer is not the most glamorous of the statewide offices, but you've worked in that business for most of your career, right?
That's correct. I love numbers. I also understand how those numbers impact people's lives. Been doing this work for 35 years. I'm your current state treasurer, and prior to that I was your deputy treasurer for 7.5 years. And before that, a deputy treasurer in another state. All in, I've been doing this work, as I said, for 35 years. I love numbers, but I understand that those numbers impact every single citizen, every nonprofit, and every business in the state.
Could you tell the viewers just a little bit about the Beth Pearce who is not state treasurer,
Sure.
just to get to know you a little bit?
Well, again, I love numbers, and this is a big part of my life. I love Vermont. I do a little bit of bird watching. I will tell you, I like walking in the more contemplative side a little bit better than identification, but I very much enjoy that. I love reading literature, and I have a little bit of a hobby. I like to read about the history of mathematics and physics, particularly of non-Euclidean geometry. A little bit geeky, but I love it.
Interesting. And why do you want to continue on as treasurer now?
Well, as treasurer, I've had the opportunity to serve. This is the way I serve. I've been involved in public service all my life. My grandmother was active in the early women's movement. My father was a local member of the select board, the finance committee, which I think I caught some of the bug from him there, and on the school committee. So I've seen government in action most of my life. I've been more about government than politics, and have worked in the public sector my entire life because I think it's important to add value to your community. This is the way that I serve.
Now, you're challenging, or you're being challenged, I should say, by an opponent who is fairly well funded this year. It appears that that's one of the races that the Republican Party has targeted.
Yes.
And as a result, I know that I have seen her name advertised on the internet and on television. Why should the voter pick Beth Pearce instead of Ms. Wilt?
Okay. Well, let's deal with both pieces of that. One, the reason they should pick me is I am the most qualified person for this job. This is my life's work. This is what I do for a living. This is not a stepping stone to another office. This is very important to Vermonters because the bottom line for Vermonters is the state's AAA bond rating. We're rated very highly, the highest in the nation by Moody's and Fitch. AAA, and we're rated AA+, which is the second highest rating by Standard & Poor's. We recently had an uptick in that. We moved from AA+ stable rating to AA+ positive outlook, which means we're on a path to AAA. Why do Vermonters care about that? First, it saves them money. We refinanced some bonds in March and saved the taxpayers $5.4 million. We went out and issued $93 million of bonds this past month, settled in October, and we were able to do that at record lows because of our great credit. But it also impacts every citizen because the work we do and our financial ratings, our bond rating, lowers the cost of financing for affordable housing through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, lowers the cost of college loans for Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, lowers the cost of financing at the Vermont Economic Development Authority, which creates jobs and economic development. So what we do has an impact. I want to continue to serve because I'm a professional. As far as the super PAC is concerned, I really think that the change, the Supreme Court decision, has really adversely impacted democracy. We're talking about big money coming into Vermont and really trying to sway an election. I think that Vermonters know better than that. They're not going to let extreme money influence the results of elections.
Now, I want to backtrack a little bit because I meant to ask this, but I didn't write it down. I think many voters may not be clear exactly what the responsibilities of the treasurer actually are. And before we get deeper into your platform, I think it would be helpful if you talked about the office a little bit for anyone who might not
Certainly.
know all of what the treasurer
Certainly.
does.
Well, we do a number of things. As I said, tantamount to that is maintaining our AAA bond rating, our good financial health. And we do that in a number of ways. We are the state's banker. So the monies come in from revenue sources. We take that money, we invest that on a short-term basis, and pay the bills. About $5 billion comes in on a given year, and we also manage, as I said, the short-term cash, some of our trust funds, our higher education trust fund, the tobacco trust funds, and we also provide the technical background and expertise for the state's $3.4 billion of pension funds. So it's a very important office in terms of money, managing that money. We also manage the state's capital financing plan. I'm chair of a group called the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. And what that does is takes a look at how much money can we put on our capital financing program to issue bonds so that we can promote economic development, but also keep it affordable to the taxpayer. We also have a number of other programs. One that most taxpayers are familiar with, and I encourage them to check out our website, VermontTreasurer.gov. It's the Unclaimed Property Fund. If you might have moved and forgot about a utility deposit, an old bank account, the banks and the institutions don't get to keep that money. They send that to the state, and then we try to find the rightful owner. Last year we set a record with over 14,500 folks that we were able to reunite with their money. Check out our website. We get new money every day, and we'd love to get that back to you. We also manage financial literacy programs. I'm very proud of the work we've done there from kindergarten all the way through the golden years. As you might imagine, I'm a little closer to those golden years. But that program is great because it helps individuals in the state better manage their finances, which is good for the individual, but it's also good for public policy and for Vermont. Because when individuals have adequate income in retirement, they buy goods and services, that creates jobs and promotes economic prosperity. So we touch Vermonters in a number of different ways, some through some very technical pieces. The bonding is a very, very exact process that you need to have professionals involved in, the banking and investments, but it impacts people's lives.
Now, you've been in this business, as we've talked about before, for some time. What are your personal accomplishments within the Treasurer's office that you'd like the voters to know about?
Well, I think the bottom line for us is maintaining that AAA bond rating. We saw an uptick in that outlook from stable to positive from Standard & Poor's. That reflects the good work of the Treasurer's office and Vermont, and I'm very proud of that. We've managed to save taxpayers' dollars, to stretch our dollars further. We made some changes, some structural changes to our pension programs the past 3 years. That has saved the taxpayers $20 million a year, but at the same time provide affordable pensions for our employees and reliable and adequate income in retirement. We saved $5.4 million by refunding bonds. This past year we made some really terrific changes to our capital financing program, working with Senate and House institutions that are going to save the taxpayers millions of dollars over the years and stretch those capital dollars. So we want to save money for the taxpayer and provide mechanisms to promote economic development. I'm proud of the work we've done.
Now, as the state's banker, in one way or another, you have some control over all the money that comes in from taxpayers.
Yes.
What steps will you take to protect it and ensure that it's thoughtfully invested in the time before it goes out?
That's a very good question. You know, prior to the Great Recession, a number of states put the money in somewhat more risky investments, trying to get that extra basis point. We took a look in 2007, saw some clouds on the horizon, and made some changes to our investment programs that protected dollars. We did not have the losses that other states had in their short-term and intermediate cash funds. Very proud of the work we did there. We need to continue to manage our funds so that they're safe, because the safety is the first rule of investing. Liquidity is the next rule, so that you have money that available when it's needed, and then yield. So safety, liquidity, and yield. That's very important. Also investing locally. We've done a number of programs. As deputy treasurer, I started a program called Bank in Vermont, which encourages local banking for us to put certificates of deposits in banks that have branches in Vermont. Our trust funds, we have some tobacco trusts and higher education funds. They're all invested with local managers. And we recently started a program called the Local Manager Program with our pension funds, encouraging more investment in Vermont. We want to find opportunities to invest in Vermont and continue to manage those funds locally.
So you've done local investment in the past.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas on the horizon? Will there be more local investment? Or
I really hope so. I think that's an opportunity. One of the other items I didn't mention is when we did our bonds, the $93 million in bonds, the first $27 million approximately was available for Vermonters first. So the Vermonters could buy what we call citizen bonds, which are bonds in $1,000 denominations instead of $5,000, and allow Vermonters first crack at investing in Vermont. I've been pushing for a capital gaps local investment study. Tried to get that through the legislature last year to take a look at what are the barriers for people getting capital. You look at mobile homes, for instance. They suffered some real losses during Irene, and the recovery has been difficult for a number of reasons in terms of, they don't necessarily own the land, for instance. What can we do to meet that need? What can we do to help students with the incredibly increasing cost of financing a college education? What are those gaps that the state can assist in? And how can we do more local investment? Put the treasurer's office under the microscope, put the various agencies that we work with under the microscope, come up with solutions. I'm hoping that when the legislative session convenes in January, we'll have some tangible results there to give them.
Now, you haven't been treasurer for too long, but you did have to deal with a lot of the repercussions from Tropical Storm Irene.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how your office dealt with what came before you?
Absolutely. I'm proud, number one, of the work that my office did. I've got the best staff in the state. Sorry, Governor Shumlin, your staff is good too, but we've got some terrific people there, and they really came through for Vermonters. A number of things that we did. One is that we advanced payments to towns. Because we have a good bond rating, because we have good cash reserves, we were in a better position than other states to deal with a natural disaster such as Irene. So we took money that towns would have received later in the year, or schools would have received later in the year, and sent that out early. That gave towns money, cash-strapped towns, money to us to start the repairs. They didn't have to wait for FEMA monies or federal highway monies or insurance monies. They were able to get out there, fix the roads and bridges so that businesses could get back on their feet, people could get back to their homes. I'm not going to build a bridge. You don't want me building a bridge. But what we can do is get that financing out the door. And we also worked with the local banks, brought the banks in, brought the municipal bond bank in and said, how can we provide a continuum of financing options that towns can avail themselves of? Continue to do that. We're working one-on-one with a number of towns. And we also have made available funds expediting payments again this year for towns that still have not received all of their reimbursements. We're going to continue to do that good work in partnerships. Towns should not stand alone in dealing with Irene. They haven't. We've done a great job in the state working together. When I think about us as Vermonters, we're hardworking. There's no ifs and buts about it. We're resilient, but we help each other in time of need, and that's important.
Now, you've talked multiple times about bond rating and
Yes.
specifically the Vermont bond rating. And I know that there are voters out there who encountered for the first time or with the most focus the recent debate over the United States' federal
Yes.
rating with, I think it was Moody's, being lowered.
Standard & Poor's, yes.
Standard & Poor's.
Yes. Close.
I don't fully understand it myself. And I know that there's multiple bond ratings out there. And what I think it would be helpful would be if you could explain to the viewers about where Vermont stands relative to other states
Certainly.
in the strength of our bond rating and sort of what we can do to ensure that that stays that way, what you will do.
Absolutely. That's a great question. A bond rating is very similar to your own home credit rating. You take a look, that credit rating goes with you throughout your life. It has some indicator of your financial health. And that's what the bond ratings are. As I said, we're rated AAA, the highest rating by two of the agencies, the second notch on the other. That is the highest state credit in New England, and we kept it despite the Great Recession and despite Irene. Some of the reasons we kept that is because, one, we live within our means in this state. We don't put a lot of money on our credit card. Back in the 70s, we were AAA in this state. We lost that because we lost that fiscal discipline. So we need to maintain fiscal discipline and measured approaches to maintain healthy cash reserves. One of the things that I recommended, along with the governor, to the legislature last year was an increase in our stabilization, or what's called rainy day funds, to provide that buffer. And that those rainy day funds and those pools of cash that we had was so helpful during Irene. The other is the pension programs. There's a lot of fear out there about pension programs. That, frankly, my opponent is appealing to people's fears. We can't move and make decisions about fear. What we need to do is recognize that we've made structural changes. We've got a funding plan in place to reduce that pension liability over time, and that's important because retirees with income as an economic generator for the state. We need to take a look at this in a broader picture, make the savings, make the disciplined approach, but also take a look at the fact that these are our citizens. We need to keep our promises to our citizens. If you're a retiree, or if you're someone near retirement, you should understand that your retirement, your pension is safe, and that the state keeps its word. In Vermont, our word is golden. We've also made structural changes to our pension programs. We're going to continue to do that. We've made a number of changes to the types of investments, making them a little less volatile. And as a consequence, if you take a look at the last 3-year average, we're in the top 10% of the country in terms of pension performance. We need to continue to do that good work. We need to continue to manage our pension plans, look to make sure that they're making the savings that we baked into the plan. The rating agencies have recognized that. And in fact, a national group, the Center for State and Local Government Excellence, has listed Vermont as one of the case studies about how to do pensions right. Very proud of that.
I'd like to get back to that, but just to go back to our bond rating discussion, one of the things we have in Vermont is a heavily Democratic legislature. And I think that some people fear that the bond rating could go down if spending increased and we no longer had the surplus, the rainy day fund, or a balanced budget, whichever you fear. Do you think you would have more of an ability than your opponent to go to the legislature if there was potential legislation that could adversely affect the bond rating?
There's a couple of pieces, also a very good question. First and foremost, as treasurer, my job is to do everything I can to recommend financial practices and strategies that maintain our bond rating. I'm not going to ever recommend anything that would adversely impact our bond rating. So that's the important beginning to this. The biggest threat we have is partisan politics. If you take a look at Washington and the gridlock down there, that was the reason Standard & Poor's took a look and said we need to, and lowered the bond rating, because they had little faith in the institutions of government. That's not the case in Vermont. We work together. The Treasurer's Office is a nonpartisan office. We need to take a look objectively at the finances and move forward and provide advice to the legislature and to the governor and manage our dollars for the benefit of all Vermonters. Now, I worked as a deputy treasurer with a Republican administration, and we were able to make significant changes and work together in partnership. So it's not a matter of partisanship. The worst thing that can happen is partisanship and ideological predispositions in the Treasurer's Office. We need to be nonpartisan, professional in our approach so that we can move forward with Vermont.
Now, back to the pensions. I just wanted to follow up there. But the term pension problem is thrown around a lot because a lot of towns have pension liabilities that are either unfunded or underfunded. And in the federal level, we've got fears about Social Security, which is in a way sort of a pension. Can you just talk about what the state of the state pension program is?
Certainly. Now, we do have an unfunded liability in both the state and the teacher's pension plan. And a lot of that came from the decline in the Great Recession. In fact, the state system was in a surplus position. It had an $11 million surplus prior to the Great Recession. Both systems took a hit, and there's a big number out there, about $1.2 billion. And I would tell you that number is probably going to move a little up before it moves down. But what we put in place was a funding plan to expire that unfunded liability by 2038. Mm-hmm. What you need to do is have the discipline to fund that plan. And every year, the state puts in what an actuary recommends the contribution appropriation for the retirement systems. Back in 2005, I worked on a study as deputy treasurer with the treasurer to come up with ideas on funding and to educate the legislative groups and the governor around some of the issues around pension. We've maintained that discipline of funding. We need to continue to do that. I will advocate for that all the way through my career. But the bottom line is if we manage that funding plan, we manage our actuarial assumptions. I'm going to get into the weeds for just a minute.
If
we manage the assumptions, we manage our investments and the high quality that we continue to do so, we can bring this liability down and pay that and still have affordable retirement plans for employees, affordable plans for taxpayers, and reliable income in retirement.
Now, 1.2 billion sounds pretty scary in a state
Mm-hmm.
that has a pretty small budget like Vermont.
Yes.
Could you talk to the viewers about how the mechanics of the pension work?
Certainly.
There's people paying in, there's a big pool of money somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's people paying out.
Absolutely. Well, we have, number one, we have investments under management of about $3.4 billion, and that will continue to grow. We have pensions are funded by a number of pieces. One, employees put in money, and the state puts in money into the state and the teacher system. The employees have putting in a little bit more now than they did in the past. Part of a study that we did in negotiations I did as deputy treasurer with the teacher system and as treasurer with the state system is that employees are paying a little bit more. In the case of the teacher system, we've also pushed out the age of retirement a bit, the calculation of that. So that's about $20 million less. We put in, if everyone puts in their fair share, if the state continues to manage the pension plans and to fund the ARC, the annual actuarially required contribution, that's that recommended appropriation, and the state has done so on a consistent basis. The employees put in theirs, the investments behave as we expect. We will expire that unfunded liability by 2038. Think of it a little like your mortgage. If you're at home, you've got a $250,000 mortgage. You're not going to pay it off. Yeah, you're not going to pay it off. Okay, you're not going to pay it off in 1 year. You're going to pay it off over time. The state has a funding plan, a mortgage in place to pay down this liability. We need to maintain the discipline and move forward. Some communities, frankly, that have their own separate pensions, many participate in the state's municipal retirement system, which is in very good financial states. They do not fund that ARC, that annual required contribution, or they refinance that mortgage every year. Rutland refinances its mortgage, for instance. It pushes it out every year. Those are not practices that overall are the most cost-effective way of managing that. The state has put into place discipline to do this. It needs to continue to manage it. And if we do see problems down the road, we work in partnership with people to get that fixed.
Now, I think I understand you to say that this pot, which is currently underfunded, that some people pay in and some people pay out, there's an actuary out there who's calculated what you need to do to get that pot up to a point where it's self-sustaining.
Yes.
Can you compare that with something I think a lot of viewers understand, which is the Social Security problem that's been a big issue in our current presidential election and past ones?
Okay. Well, the Social Security system, number one, there are sufficient funds at this point in time. We need to continue to take a look at that. But it's run a little bit more on what they call a pay-as-you-go basis. They're not putting in the equivalent of an ARC. On the state side, when you take a look at the annual required contribution, that's putting in the amount that you're going to need, projecting over time. For instance, I'm a member of the system, and At some point, I will retire, many years down the road after serving as your treasurer.
Right.
But I will retire. And what we need to do is set aside an amount every year so that when I get to retirement, there's sufficient funds to pay out for the life expectancy that's associated with me on all these demographic tables that actuaries do.
How long are you going to live?
How long we're going to live, okay. And that's one of the issues, by the way. The good news is people are living longer, and
Yes.
that's a good thing, and we have great lifestyles in Vermont and a healthy environment. So we put aside money, pre-funding is the term, what you're going to need for my retirement down the road, or retirement of somebody in our transportation department or somebody in our tax department, for instance. That's the discipline that needs to take place, and that's what we are doing, so that we will fund that program by 2038. As I said, back in 2007, prior to the Great Recession, the state system was actually in a surplus position. It had met all of those obligations. We took a hit. But we're working our way out of that.
And I take it that your goal is to continue the path that we're on.
Continue the good discipline that we have, continue to manage our promises to our retirees, because again, that's important. People need reliable and adequate income in retirement. That's important to our economy. If you have an older population that doesn't have adequate amounts of dollars to buy goods and services, you put a stranglehold on our future economic prosperity. The other side to this is that and it varies from year to year, but about 70 cents out of every dollar that's paid to a retiree is through investment income. If you turn around and you were, and I would never advocate this, cut retirement benefits, I think that's wrong. Okay, you've made a promise, you keep your promise.
Yeah.
But if you were to cut retirement benefits and people were now using assistance payments as a way to get through, those are dollar for dollar as opposed to 70 cents through investments. I'd rather have dignity in retirement at a lower cost to the taxpayer. I think that's a win.
Thank you. I don't mean to spend so much time on that, but it's pretty hard for me to understand, and I imagine it is for a lot of people.
Yes. It's a complicated subject. The important thing is that we've been doing this since 2005. We made incremental changes. We're going to continue to monitor it and make changes if necessary, but do that in partnership with the governor, the legislature, and our employee groups.
Last question. An issue that I've seen in elections, I think since I was about in high school in the year 2000, was the idea of a state credit card. And I think you've been involved in this in some way, even though I thought the idea was dead. Can you tell our viewers
Certainly.
a little bit about that?
It's part of local investment. We really want to encourage local investment opportunities wherever available. Back several years, again, as deputy treasurer, I wrote model language that we sent to the legislature to permit us to do a Vermont affinity card. We put that out to bid. We didn't get any bids. We're now taking a look at that and saying, what can we do differently so that we can promote that? We want to be able to promote Vermont and have some dollars from that credit card go to good programs to help with Vermont in terms of our natural beauty, in terms of environmental issues, and some of those dollars from that affinity card program would then be reinvested in Vermont. It's a program that we've got the legislation in place. We now need to do the mechanics to make that work.
Now, Beth, if someone wanted to look on a website, say, to try to refresh their memory on what your positions are, or maybe even donate money to the campaign, where would they go?
Okay, it's BethPearce.com. Beth, BethPearce.com. There's some great position papers out there. There's a few pictures. There's a picture out there I have to explain if people do take a look at it. There's a picture of JFK with some women, and one of them is my mother and one is my grandmother. We need to get a caption on that. My grandmother was very active in the early women's movement, and both of them were involved in getting women out to vote and getting and working with various groups to encourage voter registration. So when you take a look at that, you can try to figure out which one is mom. So.
Yeah. Do you have any events coming up? If people want to go take a look at the real Beth Pearce.
Well, we have a number of events. We can continue to get the message out to folks. You can take a look on our website, and I think there's a Facebook page too that has some information about some of the events that we've done. We're going to continue to do grassroots. You mentioned the Super PAC. The Super PAC does a lot of robocalls. Robocalls don't replace people. And people are important to this election. Grassroots, getting it out, that's what we're good at in this state. And I think we've got a message that resonates with folks. It's an honest message. It's about the issues. We've got some issue papers on my website. Go check it out. And I ask voters for their support.